Hello viewers, welcome to Ecology. In today's session, we'll discuss interactions in an ecosystem, which is in continuation of the playlist of an ecosystem discussed earlier. Interdependence between organisms arise from the interaction of populations of two different species. This is inevitable for the survival of each of those species. Every individual is dependent upon someone else in an ecosystem. This could be for several reasons, either for shelter or for food or protection or several other reasons. So let's take a look into few examples of such relationships. Here we can see an association between a hermit crab and a sea anemone. Hermit crab can move. It has got locomotory organs, while the sea anemone is sedentary. The sea anemone, when it finds the place where it is thriving, has scarcity of food. It tries to move out of that place to a new place in search of food. For this, it attaches onto the back of a hermit crab, and while the hermit crab moves from one place to another, the sea anemone also gets translocated truly if has chances for getting proper food in the new environment. So this is an association between two organisms. So this is dealt under symbiosis. But if the hermit crab stays unaffected, then it is headed under commensalism. But in case the hermit crab was having fear of attack of predators in that environment, and the hermit crab gets protection by the attachment of the sea anemone on its body, then this relationship becomes indeed mutualism. Here there's another example of symbiosis where both the organisms in association are getting benefited from one another. You can see this association is called lichen, where you have a fungus and then the alga. The alga, who is chlorophyllous, can perform photosynthesis and make glucose kind of food, while the nutrients required for manufacturing that food is absorbed from the rock surface or from the soil by the fungus. So the fungus brings in the raw materials to the alga, and the alga prepares the food which is utilized by both of them. So this is a good association for mutual relationship, which is a case of symbiosis. Few more examples of relationship between two organisms are shown on this image. Here, the flower which is pollinated by the visit of the bee, and the bee in turn obtains the nectar from the nectaries of the flower. So both of them get benefited by the association between them. This is indeed a case of mutualism, mutual benefit. Now comes to the next, the association between the whale and the barnacles. The barnacles do have tentacle like series on their body, with the help of which they can filter any zooplankton or phytoplankton which could be sitting on the body of the whale and feed upon it. But the whale remains unaffected when they are in association. So this relationship between the barnacle and the whale is called commensalism. The next relationship shown at the bottom of this image is parasitism. So what is it? It is one of the organism in association will extract benefit from the other, but the other will be harmed. Like here, the cat, which is invaded by the ticks, usually feels very irritated and an itching sensation persists, while the tick obtains blood by sucking from its body, by means of which it grows. This is why we say it is parasitism, although this parasite is an ectoparasite which lives on the surface of the body of the cat. There are other examples, like a common example is that seen with us, like when we sleep without a mosquito net at night, we may be bitten by mosquitoes. These mosquitoes come, sit on the skin, they pierce their proboscis through our skin and suck blood from our body and thus grow. But on the other hand, they may inject us with some pathogens which will be very harmful for us. Even if not injecting pathogens, indeed they are taking blood from us, which is harmful for us in any way. That is why this is also a case of parasitism, but since on the surface of the body, so this is also ectoparasitism. There are certain parasites who live inside the body of an animal, and such parasites also obtain nutrition from the body of a host, and that kind of parasitism, where the parasite thrives inside the body of a host, it is called endoparasitism. Here, the leopard is chasing the deer. This leopard will chase the deer, catch it, then kill it and feed upon it. So the leopard gets its food by feeding on the deer, but the deer loses its life. The leopard is the predator and the deer is the prey. Several such relationships occur in ecosystems where the carnivorous animals mostly feed upon the herbivores, maintaining a relationship of predator and prey. This process is called predation, and we find the lower carnivores are also victims of predation by the larger carnivores. This is outrightly seen in all the ecosystems that have the wildlife in common. In every ecosystem, there is abundance of organisms, and most of these organisms are interdependent upon each other for obtaining food for their survival. This builds up different kinds of relationships, as we have already discussed few of them. But here we will discuss about food chain. Food chain is a linear sequence of organisms through which energy and nutrients pass from one organism to the other via the process of eating and being eaten up. Now let's take these two examples that are on the screen. You can see in the first case a producer, which is a plant. It is drawn with an arrow towards a snail. This producer will be eaten by the primary consumer, and this primary consumer in turn will be consumed by a secondary consumer, and then the secondary consumer will be eaten by a tertiary consumer. If we come to the second example, here also we have a flower-bearing plant. This flower-bearing plant is eaten by a caterpillar. The caterpillar in turn is eaten by a frog, and then the frog is eaten by a snake, and the snake is next eaten by an owl. Now, what about this process of eating and being eaten up? If you take any step in the food chain, let me take this third step of the food chain, shown onto the right. Here we have the consumer named frog. What does it eat? It eats the caterpillar. So the caterpillar is being eaten by the frog, and the frog in turn is being eaten by the snake. So the frog eats just the previous step of the food chain, while the frog is being eaten by the organisms in the successive immediate level of the food chain. So if it is an organism who's in the third step of the food chain, it will be eating the organisms of the second step, and it itself will be eaten by the organisms of the fourth step in the food chain. Now, depending upon the diversification and the abundance of the organisms in an ecosystem, there can be food chains of 3 steps, 4 steps, 5 steps, or even higher number of steps. When it is a food chain of 3 steps, as it is shown here, it starts with a plant, the corn plant, which is eaten by a rat, and then this rat is eaten by an owl. This must be not an ecosystem with great diversity, so that we are just finding 3 of these organisms completing the food chain. But when we have more diversification within the ecosystem, we find the food chain is longer. Here, the second one that starts with a carrot plant, the carrots being eaten by a rabbit, the rabbit is eaten by fox, and the fox is eaten by the lion. Next, we come to a 5-step food chain where we find grass is eaten by grasshopper, the grasshopper is eaten by frog, the frog is eaten by python, and the python is eaten by eagle. Every time that I'm speaking, I'm saying first step, second step, third step, fourth step, fifth step, and so on. These steps are usually meant for the transfer of food and nutrients. That's why they are named as trophic levels. This trophic level 1 is always represented by a producer or a plant. The next trophic level, that is the trophic level 2, is always occupied either by a herbivore or by an omnivore who feeds both on plant as well as on animal product. From the third trophic level, we would not find anything else but carnivores, because they will be feeding upon the flesh of the herbivores. Here we may go higher with more steps in the food chain, wherein each next step will be a higher carnivore, ending up with the apex carnivore. This is again food chain of 5 steps, but here you would find most of them are the animals found in water. So this predicts that this is an aquatic food chain. Starts with the alga, then it goes to the shrimp, from shrimp to salmon, salmon to the sea lion, and finally the killer whale. So as we know, the first level, which is trophic level 1, is eaten by the organism in trophic level 2, and it in turn is eaten by the organisms of the trophic level 3, and so on. The final apex predator, who's the killer whale here, is feeding upon the sea lion, but we don't have in this same ecosystem someone else to feed upon it. That's why this makes the apex predator of this ecosystem, which it is given here pertaining to an aquatic ecosystem. Here also on to your left you can see the green plants are the starter of a food chain going to the primary consumer, that is a grasshopper, which is a herbivore, coming to the secondary consumer, then tertiary consumer, then quaternary consumer. But there is something else which is shown here. After this, there's an arrow which is marked as decomposer. But still this decomposer do not make a fixed trophic level in the food chain. I'm giving you a valid reason for it. Why? Every organism that you see, from the plant to the grasshopper, coming back to frog, snake and the hawk, every organism has a lifespan. Whether somebody eats upon it and kills it, or it just survives its lifetime. After death, death is inevitable. And upon death of any organism, the decomposers will indeed decompose the organic content and return it to the soil. That's why there can be a decomposer at the level just after the producer. There can be a decomposer at the level even after the primary consumer, or after the secondary consumer, or following the tertiary consumer, and so on. That's why no fixed place can be given to the decomposers, scavengers and detritivores in any ecosystem. But indeed they are a link will return the entire organic content back to the soil. As we all know, matter is neither created nor destroyed, but only changed from one form to another. Now let's go to the more complex relationships. Here, interconnected food chains form food webs. So a food web is a network of interconnecting food chains in a natural community of different organisms. You can see on the images right from the left hand side, although the starting is always a producer, but right from the second trophic level you can find a wide range of different organisms who are interconnected to several other organisms in the next level who feed upon them. So the alternative sources of food is made available in a food web. This leads to better stability and better availability of food within the ecosystem. Even if a specific organism becomes lesser in its population, the organisms who feed upon it gets a chance to make an alternate choice of the food. That's why the extinction or the breakdown of the ecosystem is not with surety, rather the stability is to a much higher extent. Next we see an ecosystem which is there in the sea. It is those organisms who float on the surface of the sea makes a ecosystem in itself. There's another who are the bottom dwellers on the sea, also have their food chains being constructed, but there is always a interconnection made between both of them, where not only the floating animals on the surface of the sea would make a choice to feed upon other animals who are floaters or called nectons or swimmers, but they may prefer to feed upon the bottom dwellers if they are available as such. That is what you can see here, the organisms that grow at the bottom of the ocean and the organisms who float on the surface of the ocean water. They all come and merge at the point where you come across the higher tropic levels. On the other hand, towards this right, you have another food web being shown where it's starting with a marsh grass. That means it is about a marshy land, a wet land where this marsh grass grows. It is being eaten up by the grasshopper, and then that is by the grasshopper being eaten by the shrews, and the shrews can be eaten up by the hawks or by the snakes. This is the two food chains you can see here directly. Again, you can see in the like shrews, which are in the third line of this tropic level, they make another food chain that is coming through the cattails, which is being eaten by the crickets, and the crickets being eaten by the shrews. The shrews in turn could be eaten by the snake or the hawk. Here it is making another two food chains. Then you have one more food chain coming up, which is the cattails being eaten by crickets, crickets being eaten by frog, frog being eaten by snake, and snake being eaten by the hawk. So you can see large number of food chains operate within each other, where at certain steps they crisscross because of the alternate food which they find within that diverse ecosystem. Now here is a image of a pond where you can see large variety of organisms with diversification allowing the existence of food web and not just the food chain. This image is about the transfer of energy at the tropic levels in a food chain. At every successive tropic level, the amount of energy that is transferred gets lesser and least. Only 10% of energy can be transferred from one step of the tropic level to the next. That's why when we move to a food chain or a food web up to the tropic level 5 or 6, we hardly find there is any good proportion of energy available for the organisms so that it can allow their existence in a flourishing manner. That is why food pyramid here showing the pyramid of numbers will always have a broader base with more number of organisms compared to the successive upper levels. From the producer, when we move to the next level of primary consumer, which comprises of herbivores, will definitely have lesser number of herbivores compared to the first level in the pyramid consisting of the plants. From this primary consumer, when we move higher to the secondary consumers, the number of secondary consumers who will be occupying the third level in the pyramid will still be lesser in number compared to the ones occupying the lower step in the food pyramid of number. And that's how the topmost peak will be occupied by the lowest number of organisms in a food pyramid of number. Here is a pyramid of biomass showing the relationship of the different trophic levels and the biomass which is available. So the base shows the highest biomass, which is corresponding to the biomass of the producers. When it goes to the next trophic level, the biomass that the organisms of the second trophic level consumes does not equal to the amount of biomass on which they fed upon on the producers. Similarly, when we go to the next level, that is the third trophic level, with the secondary consumers, the amount of flesh that they fed upon the primary consumers or of the herbivores in their lifetime do not equal the biomass at the third level organisms. And when we come to the apex predators, the biomass or the flesh of the previous trophic level organisms that they would have consumed in their life never matches to the biomass which is available in their body. It keeps on decreasing from the first trophic level to the next till it comes to the topmost with the least amount of biomass that is expected in the top predators of top carnivores. This is indeed due to the loss of energy at every level via heat and other metabolic waste. This is a summary sketch of the flow of energy and nutrients throughout the ecosystem, and on the right it is about the recycling of the abiotic components via the food chain, food web, and then recycling through the microorganisms, returning the constituents back into the environment. Now we come across the national parks and protected areas where our country has made strategies to protect the wild animals with their grandeur so that the ecosystem doesn't run into imbalance. You can see in this image the lions, which are the most important fauna of the Gir forest. The next is the KAZIRANGA National Park, which is famous for the rhinoceros. The next is the Ranthambore National Park, which has quite a variety of organisms, and amongst the wild animals, the tiger is very important species in this national park, along with large number of birds also seen there. Next is the Bandipur National Park, which too is importantly conserving and breeding tigers. Then we see the magnificent tiger in Jim Corbett National Park. Other than these national parks, there are sanctuaries in India to protect the endangered species, which has indeed preserved the wildlife, and this helps to establish equilibrium in an ecosystem. Now we'll come across few of the natural forest ecosystems and speak about few fauna and flora who are most important in those ecosystems. This is a coniferous forest with coniferous trees like pine and cedar, and the fauna who make the most important ones in the coniferous forest are the black bears, pandas, and the pheasants. We do have many more, but they are the most pronounced ones. This is the next forest type, which is called the deciduous forest. The flora that are most important in this deciduous forest are the teak, sal, and the sandalwood, whereas the fauna are the wild buffalo, gaur, sambar, and several more. Then it comes to the evergreen forest, which is a house for huge number of plants as well as animals, but I have named a few for you who are even more important as compared to the rest of them. Under the evergreen forest conditions, so the flora are the bamboo, mahogany, and the ebony, whereas the fauna is leopard and the Nilgiri macacas. The next is the thorn forest. This is a little desert-like conditions where the flora is acacia, cactus, and most xerophytic plants. Comes to the fauna, it is the camels, chinkara, the great Indian bustard are the most important ones to name. This is just by seeing the pneumatophores, you can understand this is a marshy area and this is a mangrove forest. In the mangrove forest, the flora are with wonderful looking trees with huge number of breathing roots coming down from the stems. These mangrove trees, like palm trees or those that grow on the marshy soil, have buttresses for breathing. They are also called the breathing roots. And the important fauna here will be crocodiles, gharials, mudskippers. Tiger is also not an exception. This lesson was strategically made to arouse the concept of preserving the ecosystem. You are indeed expected not to destroy any organism until and unless you find it is damaging for your survival, because our survival totally depends on the balance of an ecosystem, and to strike a balance we have to allow every organism to prosper in its own way. Only then our earth will be the best place to live in. Thank you for watching. Please do like my video, share it with your friends if you find it useful, and never forget to subscribe to my channel if you still haven't done so. Thank you. Happy watching.